also. Okay. So I wanted to, we started this journey of the Jewish year, journey through the Jewish year back in January, which is not exactly the right time to start the Jewish year, but we're doing the Jewish year through the secular year. And so that means we only have a couple more weeks left in our journey. And we've covered the holidays, we've covered Shabbat, we've covered some other topics of Jewish nature. And one of the social justice topics, just one second, somebody else is coming in. So another topic I wanted to get to. So as I was saying, we started this journey through the Jewish year in January. And so the secular year is nearly over. So that'll mean this class is nearly over. And you can look back on YouTube on my channel for all the recordings of the journey through the Jewish year. That's how they're titled. Just look for the date and you'll see all of them there. But I wanted to get to a couple of social justice issues in our journey, and I wanted to touch upon gun control today. Gun control is a point of contention in American society today, but not so much within the Jewish community. There seems to be a consensus, or at least an understanding within the Jewish community that gun control measures make sense and in fact should be legislated. But at the same time, according to Jewish law, it is permissible to own a gun. It is permissible to serve in the army, and it is permissible to defend oneself. So let me step back here and approach this topic in this way. There are two major ideas, I think, related to this idea of the topic of gun control that we find in the Torah. The first idea is that it seems pretty clear from the beginning of the Torah that Jews had weapons on them, or if they're not exactly weapons, they had tools by which they could kill animals. So in the portion Noah, which is the second portion of the Torah, the second portion in the book of Genesis, even before this, I'm sorry, in the fourth chapter of the book of Genesis, we're introduced to Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel. And we're told that both Cain and Abel bring offerings to God. Abel brings of his crops, and Cain brings from his flock. So if he's offering animals from his flock, one would assume that he's using some kind of implement in order to slaughter the animal, in order to offer it. So there's no comment in the Torah about it. There's no parenthetical note. For the first time in human history, Cain has now offered an animal as a sacrifice. No, there's no comment like that. It's just taken for granted, understood by the reader. Okay, offering a sacrifice. Again, with no other background to it. And then in the portion Noah, in gratitude for surviving the ordeal in the ark while the earth was covered in rainfall. After leaving the ark, Noah offers animals that were pleasing to the Lord. So we have that parenthetical note, that description that this offering was pleasing to God. Now, again, it's just understood that that's what is done. And then in the stories of the patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob build altars to serve God. So sacrificing animals is seen as standard practice without even any need for the Torah itself to teach us anything about it in these stories in Genesis. And only in the book of Leviticus are we told specifically what animals are brought as a sacrifice and for what particular reasons they're brought as a sacrifice. So my point in all of this is having implements in order to sacrifice animals seems to be taken for granted by the Torah. Okay, so having those implements in our possession is something understood by the Torah that everybody would have, right? And until the book of Leviticus, sacrifices theoretically could have been done by anybody and everybody, that these implements wouldn't be reserved as they start being in the book of Leviticus to the purview of the Kohanim. Before that, everybody might have these implements and might be able to offer animals as a sacrifice. So that's point number one, the idea that everybody would have some kind of implement that can be used to slaughter an animal. Point number two is from the Ten Commandments themselves, that the sixth commandment is do not murder. So depending on the translation, depending on the non-Jewish translation of the Bible that we have, that commandment in Hebrew, lo tirtzach, could be translated do not kill or do not murder. And there's a really, really important distinction to be made depending on how you translate the word. Clearly in Hebrew, lo tirtzach should be translated do not murder. And if we're commanded not to murder, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not allowed to kill. It means that we're not to have premeditation to kill someone, which that would be defined as murder. We would be allowed in self-defense to kill. That seems to be the understanding, and it's certainly the understanding of the rabbis in their interpretation of the Torah. So that it's clear in rabbinic interpretation of Torah that that in self-defense, and also for the rabbis, when we are autonomous in the land of Israel as a nation of Israel living in the land of Israel, that it would be appropriate to have an army, and the army is allowed to conquer the land of Israel and then stand in defense of its borders, which would mean killing people in the process of the defense of the borders. So killing in a time of war is not considered murder, and that is permissible according to the rabbis. And a classic statement is, if someone clearly rises with intent to kill you, you have the right to preempt that act from taking place by killing that person. And that would not be a violation of the sixth commandment of the 10 commandments. Okay, so with those two ideas as a background, that that people would be in possession of implements that would be able to slaughter an animal, and with the idea that we're allowed to kill in self-defense, therefore we would have some kind of weapon or an object that can be used as a weapon in our possession. It seems pretty clear that Judaism is not a passive and a non-violent religion. It is violence for the sake of food and violence for the sake of self-defense. Okay, so this is, again, and when we think about religion, possibly we think of peace-loving. That is a major element of what it means to be a religious person, that our go-to is turn the other cheek. But though that is a concept in Christianity, turning the other cheek is not a Jewish concept. If someone if someone slaps you with his hand, then you could say, depending on the circumstances, that we should turn the other cheek. But if someone is clearly about to do you harm with a weapon, an object used as a weapon, then no, we are not supposed to turn the other cheek. In fact, we would be violating the commandment of spilling blood, namely our own. We are not allowed to let our own blood be spilled, nor are we allowed to permit someone else's blood to be spilled. So in other words, if I see A with a weapon clearly about to do harm to B, then me, C, am allowed, not only allowed, I am commanded to intervene to protect B from A. All right, if you understand that. So now if we're looking at our Zoom screen, so if Rita has a gun in her hand pointed at Lori, it is my responsibility to intervene to make sure Rita doesn't do Lori any harm. And if I don't intervene, then I would be liable for whatever happens to Lori. Not Rita would be liable for whatever she does to Lori, but I also, as a party that had access to be able to do something and chose not to do something, I would be liable for not intervening. Okay, so I could intervene by tackling Rita, but I also could intervene by pulling out my dagger or my sword and intervening in that way. And hopefully there'll be other witnesses to assure that I would not be liable for causing Rita harm. That it would be clear that in defense of Lori, I was coming to the rescue. And if Rita was harmed by my defending Lori, that's okay, because that's the circumstance. Yes, Lori, unmute yourself. Yes. Yes.
What if the situation meant that you were putting your life at risk?
So right. Yes. So that's a good question. And that's a tough balancing act, a tightrope to walk. So yes. So so let's say I'm Goliath and it's Rita. So clearly not much is going to affect me as Goliath that I would worry about my own health or welfare. Okay, so in other words, right, so someone who is fully armed and protected and clearly much bigger and stronger than the potential perpetrator doesn't have much to think about of putting his or her life at risk. Okay, but let's say it's someone the same age as Rita Rubenstein, someone of the same gender, and this is not to be sexist, but someone of the same gender, someone of the same strength, then yes, there's more to think about as to what, how much one is supposed to put themselves in harm's way or not. Okay, so that, let's say, Rita's threat of you in this example is a knife. That is a little bit less threatening than a gun. Okay, it's still dangerous, but let's say her weapon is a baseball bat, which might be even less threatening than a knife. Okay, so it all depends what the circumstances are. And also depends on Rita's state of mind. Is Rita pretty quiet and calm looking? Or is Rita foaming at the mouth? And if she's foaming at the mouth, then that means that there's something mentally unstable and physically wrong with Rita, which then could impact my involvement in protecting you. So that protecting you could mean calling 911 as opposed to physically intervening myself. Okay, so, or let's say I've been trained as a in the Army, and I was let's say I'm a former Marine or a former Navy SEAL, or I've been trained in Krav Maga or some other self-defense kind of art, then perhaps I have skills that the average person doesn't have that also would impact my decision to be able to intervene or not. So all of this has to be considered as to whether one should intervene or not. Okay, and it's kind of hard in the heat of the moment to decide whether one should intervene or not. And in the heat of them, and then after the fact, whatever happens, it would be up to the rabbinic court to decide what was reasonably expected of me in the heat of the moment to do. Right. So all of these things would be under consideration by a rabbinic court as in a time when there would be Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel, and that the law of the land would be the Talmud. Okay, what happens in the state of Israel today is not, even though it's a Jewish majority state, the state of Israel is not run by the Talmud. There are segments of Israeli society that would like to see it that way, but no, Israel has its own legal system. Protecting the statement there of intervening is based on a sentence in the book of Leviticus, which is al ta'amod al dam re'echa, which literally means do not stand on the blood of your fellow human being, which is a bizarre statement, which is understood by the rabbis to mean you can't stand by while something terrible is about to happen or is happening. You have to reasonably intervene without putting your own life and health at risk. Okay, so again, it depends on the circumstance and so that's the general principle, but the specifics for each circumstance would be different. Okay, so now basing these two concepts, that sacrifice in the Torah implied that most people had some kind of implement in their home, and also that we are allowed to kill in self-defense, could also imply that most people had some kind of weapon that they could use in their home as self-defense, whether it be a dagger, a sword, or something like that. certainly then teaches us that Judaism recognized that people had weapons, could have had weapons at home. The idea, though, is that these weapons are regulated. And that, so as we go on the slippery slope and understanding our attitude towards weapons, clearly the I think 100% all in the Jewish community would agree that Judaism recognizes that those weapons should be under some kind of legislation, that there isn't free reign use of weapons in Jewish law, but rather the idea that these weapons need to be thought of carefully and treated with respect and used only when we after careful consideration. That would be the Jewish understanding, so that when we, as the American Jewish community, want to react to mass shootings that take place in America on a regular basis, like what happened in Oxford, Michigan last week or so, and I'm sure it will happen again soon. We're just waiting for the next mass shooting to take place. It seems pretty clear that the Jewish perspective would be that gun control legislation is appropriate, if not necessary. We can understand that people can be allowed to own a gun if they wish to, but there would be appropriate measures to take place that need to be in place in order for someone to be allowed to own a gun. There could be standards in place as to what kind of guns people should be allowed to purchase. Like, we shouldn't be allowed to purchase a submachine gun. There's no way, right? So in other words, if we agree that hunting is a permissible activity in America, that owning a gun for self-defense is a permissible activity, and that from what I've presented already, that is the case. Hunting is not a Jewish activity, by the way. Never was, because of the idea, most people who hunt, much of the time, hunting is for food. Yes, hunting could be for sport, but in the Jewish perspective, hunting for sport is really harm to the animal, and it's tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, which is kind of hard to translate. We have to feel for the animal, feel for the pain of the animal, and hunting for sport is not really seen as a necessary activity. It's one thing if you're killing the animal for food, but you can't kill the animal for food by hunting. It's right. The only way to eat an animal, according to Jewish law, is if a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, uses the regulated knife and uses the knife in the commanded way to kill the animal at the slaughterhouse. So you can't bring a shochet with you out to the woods, trap a deer, and then have the shochet, while the deer is trapped, kill the deer. That's not how it works. Deer are kosher animals, but not if you just catch a deer and bring it to the slaughterhouse. Deer are kosher if there's a deer farm. Domesticated animals are kosher to be slaughtered, not wild animals. Okay, so we eat turkey and we eat chicken from the farm, not going out to the woods to hunt wild turkey. Geese are kosher, but on a goose farm, not going to the pond in your neighborhood and catching a Canada geese there and bringing it to the slaughter. Okay, so then so legislating weapons then makes sense. That you only need, you can get, we could it makes sense to have a hunting rifle, that should be allowed, or some small handgun as for self-defense. Anything more than that is clearly, the intent is for something to inflict harm on purpose, as opposed to in self-defense. And at the same time, it should be there should be testing and licensing requirements in place in order to purchase a gun. One has to come with a letter saying, from a doctor, saying that one is mentally fit, and aside from physically fit, in order to handle this weapon. And there should be regular testing and classes to take in order to keep on using guns. So in most countries in the world where people are allowed to own weapons, major licensing and testing are required. So there's a quick article about Jews and guns on the My Jewish Learning website, and it brings out Israel as an example. Now, a lot of people in Israel own guns. Well, a lot of people in Israel, most people in Israel, enter the army first after high school for 3 years. And so everybody in Israel then knows how to use a gun. And once you're discharged from the army, then you're in reserve duty. And depends on the kind of reserve duty you have. You might have a gun in your home all the time, or you might not. And if you have it in your home, then you have to have licensing in order to keep that gun in your home, to be sure that it's locked away, safe. And if you have children in your home, that be sure to keep it far away from your children. So gun violence in Israel, though it does happen, is few and far between. I mean, there are not the mafia, but there are crime families in Israel in certain neighborhoods around the country. And there's a rising rate of crime in Israel among predominantly Arab cities and towns throughout Israel. So that's a major thing. That's part of the issue of this unity government, to try to, which includes an Arab political party in it, to try to have more police presence in those predominantly Arab towns. So gun violence does take place in Israel, but it's not to the extent that it is here in America. And in England, in Australia, and Japan, you rarely hear about massacres like we hear about in America. And even fewer, you rarely hear about the use of guns to perpetrate murder and other violence in other countries. So clearly, gun control legislation works. And so there shouldn't be anything wrong. Well, let me say it this way. It's perfectly acceptable and for major Jewish social justice organizations to promote gun control legislation. I have signed petitions over the years. When the March for the Living happened after the Parkland High School, Parkland, Florida, the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting happened in February or March 3 years ago. And the march was happening on a Shabbat down in DC. I advocated that I was going to go. I was going to spend Shabbat at a hotel in DC, and people could meet me, and we would have a Sharei Tefillah group that would be part of that march. And I was proud that we had about 15 people who joined us that day for the March of the Living. So I clearly am a proponent of gun control legislation and see it as a Jewish ideal that yes, people can own guns, but within reason, and that there should be major restrictions and licensing and certification and other kinds of laws in place to ensure this everyone's safety. So like every other issue, social justice issue, everything is blown out of proportion and understood as for the gun rights advocates, that anything that would restrict their ownership of a gun is a restriction of their freedom. And clearly, from a Jewish perspective, freedom is meant to be restricted. All right, so that it might seem an oxymoron, but when we are free, we are truly free when our society has legislation. So that if we were totally free, that would be anarchy, and anarchy is not freedom. Anarchy is the opposite of freedom. It means that our lives are at risk, because there are these dystopian movies that came out recently, like One Day a Year, when people are allowed to inflict violence and murder and injury on other people. You have 24 hours to do that. I don't know if you've heard about those. I haven't watched those movies, but there's this dystopian movie like that. That's anarchy, and that is not freedom. Freedom means that that it's understood that human beings at their core are flawed human beings. We are not perfect, and therefore understood Jewishly that we have Yetzer HaTov, we have the drive to do good, and Yetzer Hara, the drive to do bad within us. Most people, most mentally healthy, physically healthy people are able to control the drive to do bad in such a way that they're mostly doing good. Okay, that's like the best we can be. It's the rare individual who is all evil, and it's the rare individual who is totally all good. So those saints are few and far between. In Judaism, those are the Lamed Vovniks, the 36 people in every generation for whom the world exists. These 36 totally righteous people are always doing good, and it's for their sake that the rest of the world still stays standing. And it's the rare individual like Hitler who is totally evil to their core. Most people somehow are in between on that spectrum. And for society to function well, you need most people to have the evil inclination well underfoot. And so that involves then most people, we can't leave it up to everybody's goodwill to keep their evil inclination at bay. You need laws to ensure that, just like you need speed limits to ensure our safety on the roads. You need seatbelts to ensure our personal safety while driving an automobile. I say we need to wear masks when we're out in public because of COVID. We need to be vaccinated and boosted, I would also say, in order to protect us and other people. So that's a Jewish concept. We not only are selfish, but we are also unselfish. We have to care about ourselves and about other people. So when it comes to gun control, it seems pretty clear from a Jewish perspective that gun control legislation is the right thing to do. It's the Jewish thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. So that's about all I have to say about it. I think it's common sense to us. The fact that I had 35 minutes of what to say about it, I wasn't sure that I'd have that much time, and I didn't think I'd have. Now, let me just say, before I open it up for if anybody has any questions or comments. Before COVID, when nobody thought that there would be restrictions on meeting in person, post Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, there was a rise in security presence at synagogues. And the wealthier synagogues were able to afford to hire full-time security personnel to protect and to be a security presence. We, because of the size of congregation we're not able to do that. So we had a discussion in a security committee. How were we going to do this? Were we going to pay an off-duty policeman to sit in a police car on Shabbat mornings? Were we going to ask for volunteers to be not just greeters at the door, but to be diligent and aware of who's walking into the building so that they can be like the first line of defense in order to protect people inside? Or should we have people in the congregation who have conceal carry permits to actually bring their gun into the sanctuary? So I know of 3 people in the congregation who have concealed carry permits. One of them suggested to me that he would be willing to be that person in the synagogue. I, and fortunately the security committee agreed with me, did not want weapons in the synagogue. Even if nobody knows that somebody has a gun on them, I just don't want that in the synagogue at all. That I was willing to take that risk to say that we should have this extra line of defense of trained greeters who would have a walkie-talkie on them. They'd have a walkie-talkie right at the front door, and there'd be one on the bima that would be on Shabbat. So God forbid something happened, we'd have the walkie-talkie. And then we also had these silent alarms around the sanctuary that I and other people who knew of them could press the button and the police would be called right away. So since COVID, we haven't had this. And since COVID and we've been open up again, there haven't been that many people coming to shul anymore. So we haven't really reactivated those greeters and those silent alarms. So, but it's something to think about again in terms of this whole gun control but security of the Jewish community. So I think from what I've seen from other synagogues in the area, the sense of security on Shabbat morning just isn't being talked about the way it was pre-COVID. Okay, so that's about all I have to say about gun control. Are there any questions or comments anybody wants to share? So, okay. So I'll let you know what the topics will be for the next 2 Mondays, what other social justice issues we'll discuss. I hope everybody enjoys the last day of Hanukkah and have a good week as well. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, I should call it, Jonah. Happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Happy Hanukkah.